State Representative Cedric Glover is here. Mr. Cedric, welcome back. Merry Christmas. Great talking to you.
Merry Christmas, guys. Good morning to you.
Okay, so last week, baseball, organized baseball, specifically Baseball Hall of Fame, announced that they were going to incorporate records from the old Negro Leagues into their own Major League records. I sent you an article that was written by a columnist named Howard Bryant, and we'll sort of incorporate his ideas into our conversation. But let's start here. Is baseball being too woke for its own good? What do you think about all the old Negro Leagues players, records, names, etc., all being thrown, in my mind, into one great statistical barrel?
Well, I think Major League Baseball is responding to the George Floyd phenomenon that much of the country is in the midst of right now, and I certainly commend them for their efforts to be intentional in terms of what they're doing. I just simply think that it's a little bit hollow, symbolic, and kind of like Howard Bryant states, as well as others, that it doesn't really address the core issues that existed within America during that time frame. And so it ends up being, as is often the case, a rather easy solution to a very challenging and complex problem.
You know, you and I, everybody is aware of the term cancel culture and what it means, in the sense that cancel culture takes in people's lives and just eliminates them from public discourse. Is this, in an odd way, the wokest of the woke using cancel culture to cherry pick historically their own sins?
I think it's an effort to try and address those sins, but it doesn't do it in a way that, in my estimation, ends up being fair or being very helpful. In fact, as I read a quote from Howard Bryant in terms of one of his sources that he spoke with at Major League Baseball. So he says this is something that we would not have done in 2019. It's something that we would not do in 2021. It's a phenomenon of 2020, which is a good thing, and that these are issues that are affecting our society still today that we've never effectively addressed, resolved, or dealt with because of the natural inclination to want to continue to press forward and ignore the implications of those things of the past. But certainly the effort is commendable. But again, I think the potential is that it does more harm by putting Major League Baseball in the posture of thinking that it's actually addressed the situations and circumstances that it really supported and benefited from by simply putting into the record book things that are very hard to actually establish as legitimate. And in that regard, you end up, I think, also creating a problem for the real circumstances and challenges that those Negro major leaguers played in and endured during the time in which they played ball. And that is, for their league, they not only had to play their official schedule in terms of what their leagues dictated, but in an effort to just simply pay their bills and make money, they barnstormed. You had difficulty in knowing some days whether or not you were playing an actual league game as a Negro leaguer, or whether or not you were playing, some barnstorming exhibition to be able to make sure you had meal money for the next day.
You make a great point, and it's one that in a slightly different way Bryant made in his article, in his column. And he said what baseball, organized baseball, and he used the term repeatedly in his article, dripping with sarcasm, organized baseball, the reason, and I said this earlier in the show, the reason that the Negro Leagues existed, that the subpar pay, the subpar conditions, the travel, the stadiums, etc., the reason they existed was because of the segregation foisted upon them by white baseball, organized baseball. And by eliminating in this sort of we're all going to be in one big record book sort of move, baseball seems to be forgetting, organized baseball seems to be forgetting that the reason the Negro Leagues existed was because of them, meaning organized baseball.
Exactly. And that is the story that needs to be told. That is the history that needs to be detailed and documented. That is the story that needs to be preserved and shared to coming generations. And that's where I think in this particular effort, the Major Leagues missed their opportunity, and that what they really should be focused on is ensuring that institution that's there in Kansas City, in tribute to what Rube Jackson and those guys did back in 1920 in forming that first Negro National League that became the basis of the 7 to 8 leagues that exist around the country, that is the history that needs to be enshrined and properly empowered, because that's an institution that struggles to exist from year to year. So if Major League Baseball really wanted to do something to address that history, then they would ensure that history is preserved, that it's detailed, that it's told, that it ends up being properly connected, so that you end up with people growing up in Shreveport knowing that there are people like Willard Home Run Brown, who was the first African-American to hit a home run in the major leagues, who was actually born in the city of Shreveport. He was a bat boy for the Kansas City Monarchs back in the 1930s, because the Kansas City Monarchs did their spring training in Shreveport. That's the history that needs to be focused on.